Sunt Adrian Bocăneanu cu o nouă ediție a emisiunii Punctul de plecare, filmată după o lungă pauză cu sprijinul prietenilor noștri de la Biserica Adventistă Română din Lawrenceville. Invitatul de astăzi, Michael Field, reprezintă o istorie foarte, foarte lungă de credință și servire, pe care el o continuă cu devotament în Biserica Atlanta North, în care și eu sunt membru. Vă doresc o vizionare cu folos. Welcome to the starting point. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for having me.
And in a way, you are going to speak out today not just for yourself, but for a couple of generations.
That's
Because,
right.
as you know, some month ago I approached your father, but he felt maybe due to age and some health conditions, he was not sure he would be able to express himself as he would like to. But you carry on his spiritual heritage.
We'll try to.
Yeah. So tell us,
So
how far in the history can you trace your ancestors, and
Sure.
especially their faith experiences?
So just briefly about my father, who's 86. He'll be 87 later this year. And I guess it was, a little over, about a decade ago, he had a stroke. Minor stroke. And the Lord has blessed him so that he was able to recover, most fully, except for some speech hesitancies, and that's probably, and some focus. He does really well one-on-one with people, but in large settings where there's a lot of noise and a lot of conversations. So,
It's distracting.
yeah, just I think pulling up the right word, he would do fine. I think he's a little hard on himself sometimes, but I am still blessed to continue to learn from him and to see him active in other ways and that sort of thing. But I'm glad to be able to share what he has taught me, and also just in the history. He loves history and genealogy, and he has always wanted to share that. And we have an interesting history with this church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. My great-grandfather, back in 1867 and 68, beginning of 68, was sent down here from the Michigan area to minister in the South. That would be just after the Civil War had, and they were trying to bring the message down here to be a missionary. And
Sure. Up to that point, the Adventist message has been developing mostly in the Northeast.
correct. And as I understand it, his mother was an early pioneer, would have lived her life right in the time of the Great Disappointment in 1844, where many different denominations were expecting the return of Christ and that sort of thing, but she passed away when he was only 5 years old. So this is my great grandfather. Okay, so my great grandmother, passed away, when he was 5, and he then was raised by an older sister, and grew up in the Michigan Battle Creek area, and in that area of the United States, and don't know much about his upbringing, and of course, being 5 years old when your mom passes, you don't have probably a lot of remembrance of maybe her influence
Yes.
at that time. So maybe been the older sibling, who was more of the influence in raising him up. But yeah, it's neat because you can go online. There are many archives to research this, and the Adventist Church puts all these documentation on there from minutes and meetings and that sort of thing. And so I was able to search his name. Of course, my father had done much of this on his own through just, talking to his mother, and her remembrances and that sort of thing. And I was able to show him, even last evening, a little bit that he had not read. I had found a pretty good little several paragraphs where they were making mention of his, like commission to come down and to establish to purchase some property and to, try to, he was a colporteur to sell literature,
Yes.
And to bring unchurched, people to Christ, and it was just neat to see the information that they put. They gave an address of where he, had located a large home, and that they could house different workers there, maybe that they would send, and some would come and go,
Yes.
all working to just spread the word. And so he was like one of, we consider him one of the first, Adventist Christians to come down into the Atlanta area. And from there he established he got his a medical degree. He had an interest in that. He studied with Dr. Kellogg in Battle Creek, the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and he had an interest in the hydrotherapy, which can treat different ailments. Dr. Kellogg had been working on up there, and he brought that down to Atlanta and established a sanitarium down here, and started treating local individuals. He would treat for ailments and alcoholism.
Really?
And things like that. We're trying to learn a little bit more about my father. Actually was born in the facility. I mean, it was like a very large home. And it was in kind of a residential, type of area. But he was born there, and he remembers that down in the lower level, there were all these tubs, that you could hold lots of water, and just, he has remembrances of those being, down there, and that it had its own separate entrance. He imagines that they had stopped treating and using it as a facility. It became just a residential house when he was.
The location is known, I suppose.
The location is known. It's actually in an area in the Atlanta area known as East Lake, and there's a prominent golf course located there. It's the East Lake Country Club or golf course, and the PGA has a major tournament there in Atlanta, and my dad actually grew up, it was right across the street. So as he was growing up, he became an avid golfer. He likes to play golf.
Really?
And he still does.
Really?
He goes once a week and plays at 86 years old right now, and he tells me he does pretty well. But he grew up across the street from this area. That's where the sanitarium was built and located.
That building is still there?
It is not actually. When my great-grandfather, his name was Charles Curtis, when he started to have some declining health as he was getting older.
Yes.
And I believe it was about 1920. They had stopped in the 1920s. I believe he even kind of turned it over to another gentleman, a physician, to take care of things. And then I believe it was in 1928 that he moved to California. Better, just a little bit different climate conditions, and also his son, who also became a physician, he was his name was Glenn Curtis, and he was a physician out in the Loma Linda area, and he could take care of him and kind of
Yes,
so he
yes.
moved out that direction. And at that time that he moved, he had a daughter as well, my grandmother, and she had been married, and he gave the house or the facility, the building to them. I call it it was a large building, large house. When my dad was growing up, he had many friends that thought he was rich because of the size of this. And he was like, no, we're not rich. Oh, but you live in this big house. No, it's not really that fancy, But so my grandmother and grandfather, lived in the home for a while. My dad, of course, was born there, and then and he had two sisters, but they were. I guess, going back to, my great-grandfather, of course, was an Adventist. Then, my grandmother was, and then she has 3 kids, and they all 3 were, 2 daughters and my father. And then, coming on down to this generation, which is where I am, I think about my early childhood, kind of switching gears a little bit, but once we get down to my generation, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and my dad. My mom is still alive, and she's I think she's 83, and they're both in pretty good health. But I was raised. My earliest memories is going to church. With either my mom or my father. So my mom belonged to a Presbyterian church, and my father was a member of the Adventist church. And so I had a father who went to church on Saturday and a mom who went to church on Sunday. And so as a kid, I never did not go to church. There was no skipping church because my mom would say, if you didn't go with your father, you're coming with me. So even as a kid, I could not get away from not going to church, which was a blessing.
But at that time, how did you perceive? What were your early impressions?
So I was... I enjoyed going to church with both, and so it was, I would go to Sabbath school or Sunday school, and I enjoyed learning about Jesus. This is a very early age, from 3, 4. My earliest recollections, 3 years old, 4 years old, and on up, and I enjoyed just learning, as much as I could, but I can also say that at a very early age, when I would share, so growing up in that situation where I either went on Saturday or Sunday, might be kind of unusual to some people, especially like my friends, like, what are you doing this weekend? What are you doing, Saturday? Well, I'm going to church. And they may be taken back a little bit. No, that's Saturday. And so I would have to explain that, Saturday is the 7th day, and that's the day that you would go on, and or I might be going to church on Sunday. So from a So I had an opportunity just to kind of share and at least maybe educate a little bit to some people who had never heard about the Sabbath at that early age. But I also grew up in an area that was heavily Jewish influence. There were it was a large synagogue near my home.
Really?
And so when I would go to church on Sabbath morning, we would drive. And as we're driving through some of the residential neighborhoods, we see many walking to the synagogue.
Yes.
And, many of my classmates and friends were Jewish. And they all went to Hebrew school. And right there near our house, and I always found that very interesting. But driving, through the neighborhoods and seeing, so many walking to synagogue, and that just, I guess, didn't seem odd to me. It was just an additional confirmation of the, of kind of the Sabbath and its importance and that sort of thing. I mean, I guess at the time I would question, how come they don't drive to the synagogue? And I did learn, I probably have learned more about the Jewish faith and their practices just with the tie-in to the Sabbath, and also having friends and asking and watching them and their families.
Have you ever, questioned or wondered what I am going to be between, the father's faith, the mother's faith, and now the Jewish environment?
Right. So again, going back to this early age, and I attribute it to a childlike faith that you hear about that we have, we should have. It was very early on that it was very clear to me that if I had to make a choice as to which church I would join, it would be the Sabbath-keeping church, because that just was so clear to me at a very young age that that was a true representation of a Christian faith. And so I think that my mom today still attends a Sunday church. My sister does as well.
Interesting.
My brother, I'm the youngest of three. My sister is 4.5 years older than me. My brother is 9 years older than me. So it's quite an age difference when I was growing up. But my brother, a lot of that, my dad tells a story of that he had not given his life to Christ until I was born.
Really?
And I said the same. That was like really, like when I heard that, I had not really thought about it. But he just said, I knew better. Like I knew, and he was just, he would just tell you now that he was just, worldly, and just, hadn't really made that a priority, his relationship with God. And he said, when you were born, and of course I'm the youngest, he said, when you were born, I just knew that I had to get my life together. Like I had to get my act together. And and so he did. And I did not realize that as I was growing up that he was fairly new into the church as well, and that, now that I think about it, explains why, when I was born and my brother was already 9, how he's getting older and he might not have had as heavily influenced Christian upbringing, although my mom had belonged to her church before my father. She was already a member
Yes.
and involved in her church, and
Yes.
so and my sister kind of got caught in the middle as a middle child, and but my brother has has accepted Christ, and he attends with my mom and sister at a kind of a non-denominational Sunday keeping church. But my father and I, we try to invite and talk to them about the Sabbath and that sort of thing. But,
I wonder, as you just mentioned, your father committed himself to follow Christ in the Adventist Church about the time you were born. So I wonder, how was the religious life in the family? On the worship day, the family was divided, of course. But other than that, both faith read the same Bible, tell the same stories. Many of the hymns are similar.
Yes.
There are some theological differences, but they are not so obvious. They are mainly theological for scholars, not for everyday Christian life. So were they able to put together in the family some devotions for your children and to pray together?
Right.
I just wonder about that.
So we did not have family devotions, not because my parents wouldn't have wanted to, I don't think. They have been married 60 plus years. I mean, they have a wonderful relationship. Very, wonderful relationship. Here's a perfect example. My father was an attorney, and he had a secretary many years ago. And when she had to leave, my mom came to work with him as like a secretary, and they've worked together for like 30 years or 40 years, And so if you can work together and live together,
Yes, yes.
you have a wonderful, blessed relationship. But I think at the center of that is Christ, and despite their different denominational affiliations, and again, she, I mentioned originally was a part of the Presbyterian Church. She's now part of a non-denominational church, just a Christian Bible-based church.
Yes.
And that's always what I've thought her as. She's never clung to any particular, it's always about Christ-centered life.
Yes.
And in service, she has been one to always show me to serve others through volunteer work. There's plenty of organizations in our area, whether it's soup kitchens that she would take me to when I was younger, or we have an organization called Meals on Wheels, which would be delivering food to shut-ins, elderly, people who can't get out on their own to shop, and bring them meals that I would go on. So getting back to your question, and of course my brother was out of the house. It was very interesting. I love my brother, but we really didn't have a close relationship because I was in second grade and he's in college.
Yes.
And that's really odd. I mean, I'm just getting started in my...
I know what you are speaking about. My only brother is 9 years older than I.
You know exactly then how there's this figure that you might look up to.
Different generation.
And yes, exactly. I thought the world of him. I looked up to him. He was a wonderful big brother, but because of the age, he was out of the house.
Yes.
And, and it wasn't until, my older adult years that I think, have gotten closer, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. So for us to have gathered around, it was not that way as a family. However, I know that both my mom and my dad have always been supportive of one another in their their walk with the Lord, they'll study, I mean, as far as like, maybe sharing some things with one another, I would imagine. And, she's come to some functions at his church, and he's gone to some functions at her church, and met wonderful Christian people. And, never any problems regarding that. She's very respectful of the Sabbath, and and letting him, worship and keep the Sabbath, and so that is kind of the way they've managed things.
And I suppose that also influenced you to be respectful and understanding, and
yes.
to see common ground as much as possible.
I believe that it has. It also gave me a broader picture, and there are many people, many Christian people from all denominations that God is using and working through. I mean,
Yes.
that's I know that to be true, and can see it daily. But getting back to my, I guess maybe my decision. This at an early age, again, I just recognized that if I wanted to be true to God and do what He was asking, what I knew He was asking of me, it was to honor the Sabbath, and when I finally, I was probably about 26 years old, when I committed, my life to Christ, and that seems a little bit old, having grown up, and there's really no excuse. It's very sad that I wasted so many years just through my teen years, just being rebellious and just having these wonderful Christian parents, but just kind of turning my back on God and knowing.
You mean it was an open act of like denying God or denying His requirements, or maybe saying, I want to live first my life, to enjoy life, and I know sometime I'll be back, and I know what to do, I know where to go.
Maybe a little bit of that, in the sense that, being, thankfully, I was raised in a Christian home, that I knew the difference between right and wrong from a godly perspective, yes, not a worldly perspective. Yes. I think that the rebellious nature that I just let, Satan have so much toll on me, or hold on me, was that it's a selfishness. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. It's just wanting to do your thing.
Yes.
It's why young people say, I don't want to go to church. When their parents are asking them, get ready, like, come on, let's get ready to go to church. I don't want to go to church. Mm-hmm. And it was, I want to do my own thing. Maybe they're like, I don't think that's fun, it's boring, or what have you. It's, I think it was just a lot of, I wanted to do my own thing. And, but maybe a little of that was in the back of my head, what you mentioned about, mm-hmm, I know what's right, I know what's wrong, and one day maybe, mm-hmm, I'll get my act together. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if my dad had the same thing, which took him longer in his 30s, you know, to kind of say, for these, and he really said it was for the kid, you know, that I understand I need to do this for my children. And he has made that, you know, a priority since then of ministering to us kids.
Do you think it was also, you know, reflecting the mood of society? I suppose that was in the 60s, the roaring, rock and roll.
Yeah, but he was not.
No, I'm speaking about you mostly.
So, when I was born, I was born in '69.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm not that old.
You caught me.
I'm born in '69, so it would be the '70s for me, you know,
Yes.
with my young formative years. My
70s,
brother was
or
born in 59, and so the '80s, '70s, '80s for me. For my rebellious time. No, it was just clearly selfishness. I had these wonderful parents, and I tried not to, this is how bad it was for me. I did know enough to try not to disrespect them, that I would do my rebellion away and come home and be,
Good boy.
you know, good boy. Because they were so, I mean, you know, if you grew up with my parents, you're just like, oh, to disappoint my father or my mother, you know, it was just, that hurt worse than anything. I could get punished by a school teacher or the principal or, you know, neighbors or whoever, you know, that was no big deal. But to have the disappointment of my mother or father was, you know, more heartbreaking. So that, but in my older adult years, I have a passion for young people because I think of some of the things I experienced. I can remember going to Sabbath school at an old church, you know, that we had down in Atlanta, and oftentimes I would come and I would be maybe the only person there, the only kid in the classroom, and that was a little disheartening. So, or there wouldn't be a teacher.
Oh.
That's bad. You know, the class would be empty, and so I would be wandering around the campus, just kind of wandering around until church service started.
That was not the good message for you.
No, and you know, and now sometimes there'd be a couple of kids or what have you, and I don't know. It just at the church, you know, I attend now, I take a great interest in the young people and just trying to make their experience, know that that it's great to see them, you know, that thank you so much for coming, and I know there are other things you might want to be doing, but we are happy that you're here, and just engaging with them, asking about their week, you know, and just really trying to make it something where they'll want to, you know, come back and know that they're welcome. And I always appreciated that as a young person, to have these older people recognize me, you know, just be like, hey, you know, and talk to me on a level where, you know, it's, you know, not like, you know, I'm this, you know, mature adult, older figure, and, you know, you're just a kid, you know, but I always enjoyed the ones who would be like, hey, you know, and engage with you, and so I'm just trying to do that as well, and I've had the blessing to be able to lead out in Sabbath school classes and to teach, you know, different age groups.
Would you like to share a little more about the circumstances of your commitment? It was a gradual development, or it was an event or a situation triggering the change, a little bit on that? So
the one thing I would say is that comes to mind is I want to talk about the power of prayer. My parents prayed for me, unbeknownst to me, you know, but they were always praying for me, and these are things you learn later, after the fact. I remember even being in church one day and having some members come up to me saying, "We prayed for you, that your father would ask us to pray for his son, that he may come to know the Lord, that he may, and I was like, wow, that he would, through either, prayer groups, prayer meetings, ask and bring that up as an important topic to share, that was amazing to know, that there was people praying for you during this time, and I believe that it's important, so much so now. I have two sons that I have been bringing to church that are getting the pull between the world, pulling one direction, God wanting to pull them in this direction, and it is hard, and it is getting harder in our society.
That's true.
And but just knowing that it was prayer, and I can't point to one particular thing. Some people I hear, have these
Epiphany.
yeah, these moments of just clarity,
Yes.
And that sort of thing. And I think for me, and the way I was brought up, it was always in the back of my head
Yes.
what I needed to do. It was just, when are you going to do it? Or, at one point, maybe, are you going to do it? Are you going to just be a worldly individual going your own way? What kind of life is that going to bring you? Is that bringing you true happiness? We're actually studying right now about the restlessness of the world, and just people going through it, and how tiring it must be to be trying to do everything on your own, and that's what it was for me for years, is just going your own way, and when troubles would come, how do you handle them, and thinking you can fix everything, and so it was, but again, going back to my father, it was him not only praying for me, but coming to me and saying, hey, having a conversation and saying, point blank, when are you going to make a decision? When are you going to make a decision for Christ? And those are, I remember just kind of sitting there thinking, I don't know, that's a pretty bold question. When are you, point blank, when are you going to make a decision for Christ? When are you going to accept Christ? And he didn't do it often, and it was always at a, that's the thing. It was not a beating.
He was nagging you.
Right. It was not a nagging. He had has a very gentle spirit about him. And I try to emulate that with my children as well. They don't want to hear, getting pounded all the time, and it's just trying to be mindful of the opportunities when you have a quiet moment, maybe just to put a little something out there that they can hear and think about and digest. And he'd do that, and I appreciate that he and eventually I said there's no better time than now, so that was I appreciated that. I remember him as a child growing up praying with me at my bedside, teaching me how to pray and how to be thankful in my prayers, and he has such a wonderful prayer life even to this day. I'm not sure how long he prays. He likes to pray in the evening time. I'm sure he prays in the morning as well, but he has quite the list. He likes to write things down to pray about, and feel like I should probably do that because, if your mind's wandering or, I get up from prayer sometimes and I think, wow, I forgot about this, or I forgot about that person, or,
So he tends to be very methodical.
He does. He'll write out the many individuals on his on a list, as well as maybe different events, and but he'll he still kneels by his bedside like a child, and I do as well, and he but he's faithful to do that. I know I've traveled with him and stayed in a hotel, and we share, like 2 beds in a hotel room. And, I've said, okay, good night, and I'll hop right into bed, and he's kneeling by his bedside, and I'm thinking, that he is, no matter where he is, I'm not taking a vacation, or all of a sudden I'm just like, forgetting myself. That no matter, I'm not at home in my normal routine, his routine is where,
Wonderful.
Always where he is.
A few more questions. You spoke extensively about the history of your family, your ancestors. When did you become interested in that? How and in what ways did that influence you?
So, as I mentioned before, my father has always had a great interest in U.S. history, in genealogy and that sort of thing, and it's become easier to research now with the internet and all. So he would share with me stories, and of course, going to church as a child. One thing I didn't mention was, one of the fond memories I have of going with my father to church would be that my grandmother was there also, and so it was a day that I could spend, a good bit of time with her, and she was a wonderful woman. She was born in 1899, and she had an interesting experience, growing up as well. A little bit, she shared with me a little bit of, a rebellious nature. I think the times have changed so much that her rebellious nature is much different than my rebellious nature. But she I would hear some interesting stories that she would have, but just getting to sit with her, in the service, and she would always have she'd pull out her purse and she would have like a little candy for me, like a little mint or something, and it was nice just to sit next to her and through the service, and so she would share with me as well, and my father would share. In fact, in talking with my father last night about some of the history, he said if my mom were here, she would be able to corroborate, to elaborate and tell us more about this. But probably in my adult years is when I started to recognize it, because it didn't, as a younger person, I didn't understand, who. Yeah, they're just some old people, and they've passed away, and I've taken a much more of appreciation to it now, in my adult years. But it's neat to see how this development of my great grandfather came, down into the Atlanta area, and how that grew into some churches, and then my grandmother's faith in the church, and then my father's church, and now mine. But one thing I can I think about is it doesn't matter what kind of incredible genealogy you have, who you were related to. Who my father, has traced back one of our ancestors to the signing of the Declaration of Independence for the United States, and that's kind of neat to count back and see his name, there. But it doesn't matter who is in your, genealogy. When it comes to God, you have to make a personal choice. You have to decide for yourself and accept Christ, as your Savior yourself. Yes. It doesn't matter who your father is, who their father was, and so on. I think of oftentimes pastors' children have the hardest time.
Yes.
I've known friends who've had fathers who were pastors of, even other denominations, and, just what they think they have to live up to, or something, or they just, so it doesn't matter who you're, I think of even Jesus and his siblings,
But it came a time when they were with the disciples at the Pentecost. All of a sudden, they are there. The last time
right.
we knew about them, they are away or even distrusting Jesus, considering him to be weird and a nuisance.
Right.
All of a sudden, they are praying along with the disciples. Something happens. There is hope.
There is hope. And but I enjoy the genealogy of my family, and it's. And just the early history of Atlanta and how the Adventist message coming down into the area is kind of neat to explore. But
a few, 2 or 3 minutes. What are you doing as a profession, and how did you choose that? And
so that goes a little bit to my father as well. I like to talk a lot about my father, but. So my father was an attorney, I mentioned, but he really enjoyed real estate and real estate development. And so as I was growing up, he and a partner would buy land and develop it and sell it off for people to build homes on. He was not a home builder, but he did do the development part. And being an attorney, he could always the contracts and things. Yes. He would help in that respect. Sure. So I grew up watching him do these things, and then when I graduated college here in Atlanta, I didn't know what to do. Like a lot of young people, I had no real aspirations to be this or that, but. Through a series of just different jobs here locally, I found my way into real estate as well, and I got my real estate license to help people buy and sell homes, and did that for. I'm still doing that. That was back in 1999, and so over a little over 20 years. But I also enjoy. Building homes, which I'm doing a good bit of now, and that has been a wonderful thing, and that's kind of a passion, something I enjoy, and I tell people sometimes when they ask what I do, I say I build temporary housing, and they don't understand that. And I say, it'll probably last 150 years, but I say it's going to last until Jesus returns, and so it is temporary housing in some respect. But I build good quality houses, but and
at the same time, that Jesus is busy.
Yes,
building
that's right, and we need to be
permanent
prepared.
Homes for you.
Right. Yes, I can't wait to see the homes that are waiting for us. But in the meantime, we just try to, provide the housing here for us. And
Michael, I think that gives a good conclusion to our conversation today. Thank you very much for sharing. Actually, you covered hundreds of years of history of the nation and history of our faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
God continue to help you grow and be a blessing in your family and in the church.
Thank you very much for having
Thank
me.
you. Vă mulțumesc pentru fidelitatea cu care urmăriți emisiunea Punctul de Plecare. Sunt încurajat la gândul că, oferindu-vă frânturi din experiența de viață și de credință a bărbați și femei ca și noi, care sunt călăuziți de Dumnezeu să translateze trăirea lor spirituală în viața și activitatea de fiecare zi, fără să fie angajați ai bisericii, fără să beneficieze de avantajele pe care le conferă sistemul, ei îl reprezintă pe Dumnezeu în cel mai fidel mod, în haine de lucru, dacă putem spune așa. Scopul lor nu este să promoveze o instituție, ci să exprime convingerile lor cu privire la Dumnezeu și mântuirea lor. Iată punctul de plecare pentru tot ce vom fi și vom face în săptămâna care începe.